Pacing. It's a difficult thing. And we're here to talk about difficult things. Like microphone position, apparently. Something I've struggled with for years in storytelling has been how to pace my stories well. It tends to be that my brain goes from, I really have this great intro, to I have an okay idea of where I generally want it to go, and then I get excited. And I'm excited about the intro, otherwise I wouldn't have started writing, but I run into an issue where now it's just, I want you to see the end. Or I've gotten so bored of writing this story that I kick things that are under my desk. I get so bored of the story that I'm writing that I rush to the end to get done. Or I'm bored of writing the story. Either way. That's not a great sign. But it's also a sign of me jumping too far in too quickly, thinking that I need to do too much in too little amount of time, because the ADHD side of my brain, I'm not saying I have ADHD, I probably do, but I've never been diagnosed, and I don't want to disrespect the people that have been diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure I have some sort of ADHD or ADD or something. I don't know. Anyway, my brain wants to do all of it now. And then I'll get as much done as I can, and in, a week or so of my interest, and I'll set it down for 6 months, and I won't touch it again. That's a problem for me, because then it's hanging over my shoulders as a project that I never finished. And I have a number of them. One of the first books that I completed was called The Line of Bodies. And it had an incredible intro describing a man sitting on a hill that walks down into the town, and he's greatly feared by the town. And as he's walking through to find his way to, I think it was the square, the people shuffled out of their homes or shuffled out of the center of the street, and they made a human hallway to where he was going, as if they knew exactly what he was looking for. And I loved that. And I still have the book somewhere, I think. It wouldn't surprise me if I still have it. I don't throw a ton of things away. I'm not a hoarder. Very clear. I'm not a hoarder. I do throw things away. Just not as much as I probably should. Anyway, I really struggled with the pacing in that book because I tried to do too much with it too quickly. I was in high school, and I was trying to gain popularity because I was a very socially awkward person. And so I reached out to people that associated with me. And I asked them if they wanted to be in the book. Big mistake, because you will never get your character to live up to the expectations of somebody that you invite to be a part of your book unless you've sat down and had really strong interviews with them and managed their expectations, and they've managed your expectations of what they can provide, and so on and so forth. And I didn't do that. Anyway, that's not what this video is about. This video is about pacing. I went from a long intro of a gathering of friends in the course of probably, 10 chapters or so, which they weren't long chapters, but they were long enough for me. And then I went into this middle period where I was cutting back and forth between characters. And I was evoking this kind of thing that is done in the Bartimaeus trilogy, which I'm a huge fan of. I'm trying to remember. Jonathan Stroud is his name, the author of the Bartimaeus trilogy, where he goes back and forth between Bartimaeus and another character, and another character, and another character. But Bartimaeus is the focus. And I really love that type of writing because it gives you perspectives from all sides. It also ties into what we're talking about, and that I failed to pull off. And the reason I failed to pull it off is because I didn't realize what he was doing. When you write a story like that, you can control the pace much better. You might have a lot of interest going into a chase scene in one chapter. It may be Bartimaeus running away from an enemy, and then cliffhanger. It's got you on the edge of your seat. He's running, and then he runs out of road, and he turns around, and there's this enemy by the name of Jabor after him. And then it cuts to the next chapter, and it's not a Bartimaeus chapter. Sometimes it would be. More often than not, though, it would switch to another character, like Nathaniel. And it would go into this it's Nathaniel 10, 15 years ago, leading up to the situation that he's in with Bartimaeus at this stage. And it's really cool because it takes this very fast, very shot speed, like gunshot speed kind of thing, and turns it into so much more. Turns it into this cliffhanger, which already has you like, I need to know. So you already have the intrigue to continue reading. But then it slows it down and makes you think, well, this is a different setting. They're at a dinner table. One of them's reading a newspaper. One of them is eating a crumpet. It is based in England. And nothing really interesting is happening. Or it's one person learning a new skill. And all the trials that come with that. But it's not fast-paced like a chase scene. It's slow. It's legato. Lethargic almost. So, how do you control pacing? How do you get better at pacing? Well, that's one tool. You can switch between your characters and give different perspectives of the characters. And that can really slow it down because no two characters are going to see the world in the same way. Make it different. Make it interesting, I guess. It depends. Depends on your story. Also know that if you're not interested in your story, that does not mean that other people won't be interested in your story. If you've lost the love that you had for your story, that's okay. You can refine it again as you're writing it, but know that other people may enjoy your writing regardless. Stick with it. You'd be surprised. Next up, the way you're communicating with a reader is through the actual sentence structure, the paragraph structure, the page structure. So if you work towards a fight scene and you've got two characters duking it out, you've got a quick jab from right across to the left, then you've got an uppercut coming to the chin, then you got a knee to the sternum or something like that. I don't know. You're probably going to be doing quick paced sentences. You're probably going to have main character punches, cross from the left, cross from the right. The defender dodges back, ducks, jumps, and counters. These are very choppy, very staccato, as the music industry uses. Staccato sentences. They're quick chop, very short and to the point, Not a whole lot of description, just a whole lot of scene jumps. Think like a Jason Bourne film. Very, very snappy. So, if you want to evoke speed, make your sentences shorter, make them rhythmic. Very similar wording, if you can. Make that rhythm flow much like you would in a scene. Or if you're listing things. Listing things is a great way to communicate quickly. He picked up his phone, keys, water bottle, and was out the door. Instead of, he went to the table and he picked up his keys. Had looked over at the newspaper and realized that he had fallen asleep halfway through the crossword puzzle last night. He'd probably have to get back to that after the workday. He turned around and found his water bottle. Beside that, his phone, but he had to fill up the water bottle. Stank something fiercely, so he decided not to take it with him, and just about walks out the door when he turns around and realizes that he forgot his phone. See, it's very drawn out. You can build that pace, or you can cut it back. You can force the reader to delve into some of the message, or you can tell them, oh, this isn't super important, or this character is in a frenzy. They're hurrying, they're rushing. You can do those things while telling a story. And you have complete control over how the reader is going to get that information. Now, what they do with that information is completely up to them, and that's the beauty of reading a story. But it's another tool. As a DM in a D&D campaign, you can do the same thing. If you're looking at getting your players out of a certain area, start talking faster. Start breaking your sentences faster than you normally would. Instead of I want to investigate that wall. No, it's not worth it. Let's leave. No, as a DM, you say, you don't have to roll for perception on that wall. You can very clearly look at that wall and realize it's a solid brick wall. Or you can say, you look at the wall. As they're rolling, you can say, you look at the wall, and 14 says that it's a very strong wall. There are some cracks here and there from the age of time, but you don't see any reason to investigate further. That doesn't seem like it's very fast because there's an interaction going between you and a character, but you can speed that up by saying lists again. You notice the wall is red, strong, couple of cracks, seem to be worn though, nothing new. No wear marks on the floor. Cool. Doesn't interest me at all, but if you start describing things very, very thoroughly, your players might get the wrong idea and might think that they need to pay more attention to that. So just a nice quick piece. If you're looking to influence pace, sometimes that sentence or that listing structure can make it move quickly. And sometimes you can be very descriptive to slow things down, make people revel in their environment. Go back to that video. I'll try to card it up in the corner, probably up that way, but it could easily be up that way. Which one's going to be? I don't know which way how I'm gonna edit this video. I don't think I'm gonna flip it, but who knows? Editor me is a wily one. Anyway, so you can look at that video, and that video will tell you how to describe things better. You can apply that to this very situation. When you're describing a water bottle, you may take the time to point out the number of dots tall on the grip versus the number of dots wide that the grip is. You might take time to describe the logo or the shape. Or you might just say, you notice a 2/3 full water bottle. No odor, it seems to be just water. Very quick, very choppy, very to the point. Most people, when they hear choppy to the point, sneak on past it. No big deal. DM doesn't pay it any mind. I'm not going to pay it any mind. Cool. Author didn't pay it any mind. That tells me that really this is either really unimportant or I'm really hurried or the character's really hurried. Being a writer is effectively trying to lead your readers or your players, depending on the situation, into a state of empathy. An empathy for the non-playable characters or the background characters in a book, or be an empath towards the DM as a perceived character, or the author as a perceived character. It's worthwhile to practice this skill set. And honestly, this is a great one that you can, role play as a sim from The Sims, from Maxis or whatever. Go in front of your mirror and do a bunch of gobbledygook in front of a mirror, no matter how embarrassing it might be. Remember, throw out your shame. And it'll give you a pretty solid idea of how you're coming off to your players. If you need any pointers, find somebody you trust to give you constructive criticism. Don't go to any random stranger on the street, because a lot of people will just cut you down for no reason because you asked them to critique you. Go to somebody you trust that is going to lovingly correct or point out poor behaviors or poor habits. It's worth the time to focus on that, because it's going to give you, or it's worth the time to invest in that, because it's going to give you a lot more honest feedback that's going to drive you further. It's also going to come from a place of helpfulness, not a place of hurtfulness. Pay attention to that. Good life skill to have. Next up, we can talk about using heightened detail. Like I said, you can look at a grip on a water bottle and count the number of dots up or the number of dots across, and you can describe those. If you start talking about a pattern, you can even slow things down by evoking almost like an echo to your voice. You can talk about, for instance, these dots on the grip. You can say, as she looked at the water bottle, she noticed a distinct pattern. The circular dots raised from the relief, dipped and raised. A dot, a dot, a dot. And across, it was a rhythm, a song, a heartfelt beat. Dot, 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 dot ever louder, ever growing in her brain. A rhythm that she couldn't escape. Something like that. That makes it feel very slow, very contemplative, very focused. The rest of the world has kind of stretched, and time is no longer as quick as it seems. It's now much slower, much more relaxed, or much more intense. The opposite of that is, characters dropping things. Characters being in such a rush that they pick up a water bottle and their fingers slip. Or they bump a microphone, or, things like that. You can, if you want to evoke speed, we talked about that a lot in this previous section, don't describe the dots. Say, the grip was convenient. Or you can say, as they got out to their car, they grabbed the handle and their handle slipped off, or their hand slipped off the handle. They're hurried, they're fast, they're running, they're sprinting. You can describe the person, they began to sweat as they hurried out the door. Or you can just essentially say they dropped their keys. Their coffee cup is shaking in their hands. They're in a rage because they can't seem to do anything right. You can evoke that pacing in a paragraph very easily. But how about in the entire story? How do you draw that from a very focused, very fine point to this big, wide view that is the rest of the story? How do you get away from the long intro, the medium length center, and then rapid pacing ending? It's a little bit more difficult because it does measure based on your interest. Generally speaking, for me, I still have a hard time with it, so I tend to write shorter stories. If you're looking to pace yourself better, the further in, the more number of days or the more number of hours you've spent working on the piece, I would encourage you to push yourself to write your pacing in your sentences and your paragraphs just a little bit longer, a little bit more descriptive. Or use that strategy I talked about earlier, flip to another character's perspective, intro them, give them more depth, give them more backstory, give them a little bit more like you would of the protagonist. Paint them as the protagonist of this section of the book. And that will help you pace things so much better so that when you get to the end, maybe the end is supposed to be rushed. Maybe there's a bomb that needs to be diffused. And suddenly every sentence is choppy. Every piece is choppy until the very end when the timer hits 0 and everything slows down and the red wire quivers in the wind as the digital readout fades from 1 to 0. From 1 to 0. Our protagonist looks across to his partner, gets one blink off, and says, "I'm sorry." And then you can describe the explosion. Something along those lines. It takes some skill, and skill is built through practice. Don't let anybody ever tell you that raw talent is all it takes. It's a big pet peeve of mine. Talent is not everything. And anytime you talk to an artist or a storyteller or anything like that and you say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so jealous of your talent," you can be jealous of their talent, recognize their hard work, because people that are doing what they do and they do it well did not just start drawing crazy from the beginning. Maybe there are some out there that are like that. I've seen some incredible artists, especially those that are on a spectrum. I saw one that went up into a helicopter and got a 15-minute helicopter ride scanning the New York skyline. And he went back to a studio and drew the entire skyline in pen. That is savant level. Most of you are probably not that level. And if you are, why are you watching my videos? I bet you're much better at this stuff than I am. So be aware. It takes practice, and you want to pay attention to other people's hard work. I appreciate your hard work. Man, I wish I had your talent. No, man, I wish I had taken the time to dedicate to this craft like you have. This is so cool. I appreciate your dedication to your art, to your work, to your trade. Just a little pet peeve rant there. Another great thing you can do to control pacing is introspection. When you have characters that are introspective, they are inherently more interesting because that's when decisions are made. sitting down and focusing on something, or focusing on something that happened in the past. Man, really, I shouldn't have said that thing at the end of that conversation or that fight. I really should have stopped myself. Why didn't I? What happened? How can I be better next time? Or just give into it every time. But making that debate, that angel and devil conversation on the shoulders of the protagonist, can really drive a big portion of your pacing, because that conversation can go on as long or as short as you want it to. Because maybe it's just a very second nature decision for the character. Maybe it's ingrained for 30 years that they've always done this thing this way. And snapping out of it is going to take work. So that introspection might start really short, but get longer throughout the rest of the book. I don't have a great example to implement that one, unfortunately. That one, you can kind of think of your own way, your own life. What have you done that you've regretted? Or what have you done that you've been particularly happy about? Ask questions of yourself about that, write them down, and include them as part of an exercise for your protagonist. How did I handle this? Why did I handle it that way? How could I be better? How could I be worse? Because your character might take a turn for the worse. Sometimes those are the more interesting characters. Instead of the tropey ones that always get better, sometimes it's a delve into madness, and that can be even more gripping for people. So beyond that, I've only really got one more piece of advice, and it's going to be a really quick, a really quick point is that ask yourself what's necessary to include in the work. Because there's a lot of stuff that people like to include, especially descriptors, that are unnecessary. And that can actually clog up your pacing. Some people struggle with too long of pacing. Some people struggle with thinking that good pacing is fast. That's not the case. Good pacing is whatever speed you want the story to feel like. So, figure out what's really necessary. What carries the point across? If you make it short and to the point first, you can always go back in and add more story to each of those sentences. If you start long, sometimes it's a lot harder to cut out because you get attached to the message that you were saying. So make sure that you're not including too much right off the bat. I mean, there is always a strategy of throw it at the wall and see what sticks. And if you have a lot of good ideas or a lot of ideas that you're having trouble getting on a piece of paper, or if you've hit writer's block, that's a good strategy for that. But it's not a good idea to keep every idea in one book. Keep every idea and split it up. That's going to give you a diversified story portfolio, so to speak, whether or not you're selling a story. Yeah. And again, the last, I said the last thing was the last thing, but it's not. The last real thing is just remember that don't assume that good pacing is fast or slow. It's whatever you want for the story to be from the reader's perspective. The reader is going to modulate and change and distort the time that goes into a specific story that you're telling. But really, when it comes down to time, you can control a lot of that by making it fit what you want. Practice makes perfect. A blacksmith doesn't make a knife in one go. It takes several hammer hits. A writer is never going to write a whole book in the first draft. And no plastics engineer ever made this off of nothing but one sheet of calculations. It takes a lot more than that, and it takes a lot of trial runs. First drafting is a fun thing to do. Don't make it your published draft unless you get a lot of great feedback in the vein of, yeah, no, this is perfect, from people that would normally stick it to you in a loving and critical way. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, please throw me a like. If you have questions, if you have concerns, if you have ideas, or if you have other things that you need help with in your storytelling journey, throw them in the comments. And if you really enjoy the content, please hit that subscription button. Make sure it's nice and gray. If you want to get the notifications, the bell icon is there as well. You've probably heard 1,000 people talk about it. You'll probably get a little graphic up on screen here or here telling you to subscribe. I would really appreciate it. It does help me out. And I really enjoy making these videos. The more you subscribe, the more likely YouTube's algorithm is going to push this content to other people that would like this content. That'd be really cool. I'd really appreciate that. So thank you so much for watching. And until next time, have a good one.